And this is a very important point to notice, which is money multiplier. It's nothing to do with Keynesian multiplier definition, and how this monetary base that has been created at the central bank, how does that change into monetary mass to have money circulating in deposits. And this small monetary base is multiplied by the banking sector, and this multiplier sometimes is called bank multiplier, and we notice that there is a great drop of this multiplier, right? As you can see, the monetary mass goes up, but the transformation into money is reduced so that the multiplier goes down, especially here. If we continue like this, we'll have the same thing. There's the monetary base changing into monetary mass. In this monetary mass, there is some kind of multiplier, which is the speed. This is a small case m that is falling. The speed is falling. And there is a strong increase of the monetary base, however. But at the same time, there are two variables that reduce the impact on the price level, which is the monetary policy in the U.S. that led to dramatic reduction of interest rates. So just to conclude this causal analysis, here's the monetary base, as I showed you. There is the bank multiplier, changes into monetary base, M, that in its turn has velocity speed in the sense of multiplier that impacts P. And there are the two variables, multiplier M and multiplier B, M and V, as factors that reduce the impact. Now, when you think of the following situation, why are these two variables going down? The reason is pretty simple. There is expectation. The lowercase m and v are small because there is an expectation that inflation is under control. Now, if you imagine if it happens, and this has happened many times over the course of history, that expectation changes overnight. Nobody knows if it's going to happen, but it may happen, right? Here there is a fantastic mass, which is m, and if m changes, it's like lighting a match close to a gas station. And historically, one could point out when you've had hyperinflations, they emerged slowly, and at a certain point, they almost exploded. So far, so good. Later we can go back to this and continue our discussion. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, professor Antony. Acho que ilustrou bastante para a gente.
Thank you, Professor Antony. I think it was a very good illustration of how the monetary base, which is what the central bank really can impact, is just the monetary base, nothing else. And to become a monetary mass, which is the capital case M that is up to the banks, and this variable to this day has behaved, which is the multiplier. And we don't know how this multiplier is going to behave in the future. It may change all of a sudden, and be turned into
mais M grande.
more of a capital M, and if that happened,
Entendo que
which
você
is
parece indicar,
the way I understand is what you're indicating, then there would be
inflacionário.
an inflationary scenario. Now let's listen to Dalton,
A nossa visão de mercado,
to our market
Dalton,
perspective.
do Bradesco Investimento.
Dalton's from Bradesco Investment,
Então,
which is a
nós
broker
que,
company,
somos mais austríacos,
and we, more Austrian-like and more scholarly,
costuma
we tend to
fazer previsões
make
dos
projections
cenários,
of
mas
scenarios,
a
but
gente muitas vezes não acerta
oftentimes
o
we
timing dos
don't
cenários.
get the timing
O
right.
emprego do Dalton
And Dalton's
depende de
job
acertar o timing também
relies on him
dos cenários.
getting the
Então,
timing
passo a
right.
palavra ao Dalton.
So now let's listen to him.
A dura realidade.
This is the truth that's very tough.
Bom, é sempre difícil.
It's always hard
Não esperava dado diferente, né? A lógica do professor Miller foi.
to combat the logic of Dr. Miller. It's very sound.
Caetano disse uma vez que
As Caetano said,
filosofar em alemão, acho que é só possível pensar em
you can only
economia
do
alemã.
philosophy in Germany. In German, maybe you can only do economics in
De qualquer
German.
forma, tenho meia dúzia de pequenas ideias aqui.
I have about half a dozen ideas here,
Como que eu posso defender deflação numa hora como essa?
and we wonder how I can defend deflation at a time like this.
Definicionalmente, ela não faz
Uh,
sentido.
minority
expandindo o balanço do
Doesn't make
Fed.
sense when you look at the Fed balance, at the rate it's expanding.
Eu acho que parte da compreensão
I
desse
think part of the
problema é a
understanding of
ideia
this
do
problem
fósforo que o
is the
professor
idea
Miller
of the match that Dr. Miller talked to us about.
O teatro, todo o sistema
The entire
gerador de
system
inflação, ele
that
tá
creates
dado.
inflation is there.
Quer dizer, o problema é que você não consegue gerar
The problem
uma
is
quantidade de
you can't
fogo
create
no
enough
fósforo
fire
que você
on the
imagina.
match as much as you would think.
explosivo.
There's an explosive element to it.
Exatamente por isso que eu acho que a gente não tem
And that's why we don't have a deflation dilemma versus inflation.
Acho que a gente tem dilema entre
We have a deflation
deflação
between
ou hiperinflação.
deflation or hyperinflation.
A gente não tem a possibilidade de mover.
We don't have a possibility of moving in a continuum of low deflation
Inflação baixa.
to
da maneira
low
como,
inflation
o Bernanke
in the way that Bernanke thinks might be possible.
expandindo o balanço do Fed na razão de
Expanding
duas
the balance
vezes
sheet
e
of the
meia,
Fed 2.5
mais
times
3 anos, né?
in a little more than 3 years
Certamente acredito que
I think
é
that
a absoluta prova do que eu estou
is
falando.
proof of what I'm saying.
Expandir talvez 5 vezes, 10
Maybe it can be
vezes,
expanded
20
5
vezes,
times, 10
isso
times, 20
certamente
times.
Não é inflação baixa.
This would not be low inflation.
Você gera deflação, como vem gerando.
Either you generate deflation, as
Você
has
vai
been
gerar
happening,
uma outra coisa que a gente pode até não
or maybe
saber
something else
o que seja.
that we don't know what it is.
Talvez a definição de superinflação.
Maybe
né?
superinflation,
A teoria, a história de inflação, né? O
The
Klein lá falou mais de 50%.
the history of
ao mês.
inflation, more than 50% a
Talvez
month,
possa ter alguma coisa no meio, entre
maybe
uma
something
superinflação
in the middle
e
between a super and a
certamente não vai ter
hyperinflation.
inflação desejada de
I'm sure it won't be a desired inflation of 2% a year that Billy Bob Bernanke thinks he can do with his quantitative easing. Considering this monetary voluntarism, we call him Billy Bob Bernanke. It's very clear that we need to expose the challenge that exists there to fix a problem that was created. He always wanted to avoid deflation. He saw deflation as the cause of the Great Depression.
Explicitamente contou de uma forma. Imagina um jogador de poker que
Imagine a poker player.
tentar todas as formas possíveis qual o jogo que ele tem. O
Uh,
famoso discurso em 2002.
remember this famous speech where Bernanke said, "I'm not going to let this happen." Friedman taught us about
Eu
this.
consigo imaginar um jogador de poker tão
I can't imagine
tão pouco hábil.
a poker player who would be so
Você tem monte de gente vendo o Fed
unskilled.
profissional,
Any professional Fed watcher can tell.
erros assim.
I think this kind of mistake
nem no plano teórico são erros.
are beyond the theoretical aspect, but they're practical errors. You need to have a card you can play when you need it. He had all these advantages, but he gave that away.
Não necessariamente banqueiros centrais fazem isso.
Not just central bankers do this.
As mensagens délficas lá.
All the
Greenspan,
mysterious information messages from Greenspan, that whole hermeneutic that was necessary to understand his obtuse messages had a reason for being. The fact is that before I list some of these ideas, we're not talking about rocket science here. All the difference between inflation and deflation is an issue of definition. The Austrians, by definition, have a concept that's a variation in monetary aggregates. In the mainstream, maybe perhaps because of a change in time, we talk about an increase or a reduction in price by an average of prices. An average that has several problems. I don't know what it means to add apples and bananas, or add ties with something else, the price of phone, the price of your light bill. The only way you can add all this is through a monetary expression. This I know. Monetary expression is money. We can talk about what aggregate money is, but there's nothing more impossible from a methodological standpoint to think that price variation can be measured as it is today. It's nonsensical. It's ridiculous to think that I can add nuts and ties. It's beyond the scope of possibility, except through a monetary expression. I prefer the Austrian definition. It doesn't enter this trap of a hedonic adjustment I need to make for the CPI. I prefer to focus on the second. Change in prices is inflation. By a methodological construct. Now you've already left the boat. I know I'm a minority. There's an issue here that I think was treated with less emphasis with Austrians, which is deflation of the greater aggregates, especially of credit. The focus was always, both in the mainstream and the Austrians, the focus is on the categories, which were the narrow aggregates. The dynamics that command the prices is not a broad aggregate, it's credit. As we multiply credit, and credit by the modern meaning of the term, can be the entire combination from a CDO to all those other unpronounceable alphabet soup in English. It's all credit. But the dynamic of prices, which is what people care about, if I'm going to buy a bond, I depend on it. It's not enough to know the aggregates. I need to know if the price is going up, that we can observe these prices going up. Are the central banks going to have an opposite reaction, and should I buy or not a bond? This is so complex that from a methodological standpoint, I need to imagine inflation and deflation having a basic concept of monetary aggregates. In my worldly decision on a day-to-day basis, I need to think about the impact of this on the CPIs and the price indexes. And this is why it's possible to defend any of these viewpoints, as long as we define them.